Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Ingrid Anderson. I am the Director of Policy and Advocacy for MIWSAC, the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition. I am originally from Minnesota, but I do not live there currently. I'm very fortunate to be able to maintain my connection to Minnesota through our coalition and also to be able to work on MIWSAC's National Training and Technical Assistance team. I am so excited to have three of my amazing coworkers and dare I say friends join this conversation today. And I will allow each of them to introduce themselves. We also have two of our fantastic ASL interpreters with us. You will see them pinned or with the spotlight in this recording. If you need any additional accommodation or have any other questions about engaging in our conversation today, please feel free to use the chat and we will be monitoring that to meet your needs as well. Steph, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. My name is Stephanie Bridwell. I am here with MIWSAC. I'm a training coordinator or TTA coordinator. I am from Eagle Butte, South Dakota. I'm Lakota, enrolled member of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe. And I'm really happy to have this conversation with you all. Thank you for the invite, Ingrid. And yes, you can definitely call me a friend.
Thanks, Steph. Shayla, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Dancing Nisi Gosawin. My name is Shayla Beaumont. I'm an enrolled member of the Chippewa Cree tribe, but I'm also Assiniboine, Grovant, and Crow. I am the Elevate Uplift Coordinator here at MIWSAC. And yeah, I'm so excited to be with you all today.
And Becki, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I would love to, my friend Ingrid. My name is Becki Jordan. I'm our National Projects Director here at MIWSAC. I am currently living in South Dakota, which is where I am from. My family is enrolled in the Sistine-Wapton Oyate here, and I spent many years living in Minnesota prior to this, so I also consider Minnesota my home. Happy to be here with you all today.
So, part of why I've requested this specific group of my colleagues to join for this conversation today is because, of course, April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And I'm sure you're all seeing lots of social media posts and really cool resources and engaging conversations, come out, and maybe you're seeing folks in your own community talk about Sexual Assault Awareness Month or SAM, specific to the needs of your own community. And I was trying to think, in planning for SAM this year, like what is something that we really have the privilege to do at MIWSAC as a tribal sexual assault coalition. And I realized that we have the privilege, maybe the responsibility to take a moment, take a beat, because we're not in direct service. We're not providing direct advocacy services at MIWSAC. And so we can pause and maybe take a second to celebrate and just to reflect on how we got to where we are today, maybe as an organization, as an individual. How did we get to the point where we're even able to talk about Sexual Assault Awareness Month specifically? So the colleagues that I've invited to join, we all have experience in direct services for folks who have experienced different forms of violence, specifically sexual violence as part of other work that we've done and other direct services that we've provided. And I am just really privileged that I get to bear witness to the way that that direct service experience influences the way that you all not only provide like training and technical assistance in our projects, but the way that you are leaders in your families, for your Tioshpai, for your communities, and really for our organization as well. And I'm just constantly inspired because I can see that the years sometimes like really long years, grueling years of direct service have brought about like some really beautiful perspectives that unless you've done direct service, you really can't understand and you can't apply to the work of like providing technical assistance or to the work of developing an organization, that type of thing. So I just wanted to celebrate the three of you today as well for that work. And I'm grateful that you've brought that expertise and experience to MIWSAC because I am just constantly inspired and encouraged by that. So I wanted to kind of have a conversation today about the advocates or the organizations who have raised us in the movement. And I say raised us because I think a lot of folks join direct service organizations at a young age. I think it really does take some idealism. It takes some youth, some energy, right? Like the belief that we can change the world to be willing to jump into direct service. And so I wonder if any of my colleagues would like to talk about how you were inspired or called or felt moved to join this work. And if you have if you feel compelled, you can share like names of folks who helped raise you in the movement, who helped guide you, who encouraged you. And I just want to name that sometimes it is a supervisor, right? But sometimes it's just those really interesting people who you meet in community who have been doing the work like unofficially, like off the books, for a long time, who just model advocacy, who just model love and kinship and community care in the way that they live. So, would anybody like to talk a little bit about your origins, how you came to be?
I can start if others aren't feeling compelled. I was thinking and actually looking through, so I have a like a board, right, at my desk that has like quotes and pictures and all these kinds of things. And one of the things on my board is called an advocate's oath. And I got it from a long time advocate when she was retiring. And so it's like one of those things that I see every morning. And, just kind of like made me think about just like how, those small decisions in life, I guess, lead you down a completely different path sometimes. And so um, when so I don't want this to get too long-winded, but I grew up in like a small community, just bordering the reservation right beside us, very close, but not on reservation. And so at that time, like I had, experienced sexual violence, like in a variety of ways in my lifetime, and I was not even aware that advocacy programs existed, right? I didn't even know that they were a thing. I didn't know that it was a career choice, any of that. And so when I eventually graduated and had the opportunity to go to college, I went to Morris, UMM Morris, and I know some folks might be familiar with that college because they offer free tuition, right, for Native students. And so I got to Morris, and that was the first time I had ever even been exposed to the idea of um, like advocacy organizations or being involved in anti-violence like work or student organizations or any of that. And I was just like, it was like, oh my gosh, this is what I want to do with my life. Like I want to do something and have an impact. And so um, towards the end of my college career, I needed to do an internship. And so I thought, I think I'm going to try answering or try going to this advocacy organization and answering calls on their crisis line, right? And so Christine Peacock was the name of the woman who was the advocate at the time and who ended up being my intern supervisor. And I just fell in love with the organization and everything and, just all of the things that you learn. I had no idea still what I was going to do with myself once I graduated college, of course. Um, but I had such an amazing experience just interning and learning with them. And just talking to survivors, right? Like working on the crisis line and just listening and providing support. Um, and so as I was getting ready to graduate, they had a job opening. And so I thought, well, why not apply? And see if they'll hire me, which of course they did, right? Because I was already trained and had the experience and all those things. And so I started working for that organization, um, and ended up finding out very like a month later that I was pregnant, and stayed in that community for 17 years and worked at the organization for that entire time, in lots of different positions, and just did lots of different things. And I couldn't even name all of the amazing advocates and people that I met who just poured so much just love and understanding and all of those things, especially in those early days. Because for anyone who has ever um, carried a child or experienced a pregnancy, I was very, very tired, and I'm sure I was just not the best, but they were just so supportive in my young, like, baby advocate days. And I'm just so appreciative, and just, thinking about how, like I said, that just completely changes like the trajectory of things. Like I had no idea, and just found this space that I think I found a lot of healing in, and also was able to just um, listen to and just kind of hold those stories of thousands of survivors, right, over the years. But just especially just see like what it looked like for someone to make a whole career of this, like a whole entire lifetime of being an advocate, and then, even retiring and continuing to just like work in the field. So it makes me feel like a little bit emotional even to just think about it, because of all of the things and experiences. But definitely some pretty badass people that I've met over the years, and a lot of really, really great people in this field. So that's what I'll say for now. Very grateful.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Becki. And I love that you talk about who you were when you started working there, and kind of how even doing this work came to be on your radar. Because I think that that's part of the story too, right? Like when do we become aware of not only the need for advocates, but the possibility that we could be. Do you know what I mean? Like that the need isn't just outside of ourselves, or like the capacity to help or serve isn't just outside of ourselves. Like we can fill that gap. We can meet that need as well. And not because any of us are anything, terribly special, but because you're willing to learn, right? And I also appreciate just, the emotion there, because I think there's bearing witness to the movement, and then there's also bearing witness to the ways that we grow, the ways that we evolve, and the stories that we still carry. Steph or Shayla, would you like to talk at all about your experience?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that, Becki. Thank you, Ingrid. I definitely feel I really want to thank my family. I feel like ever just since a young age, being the oldest grandkid, being the oldest niece, being the oldest daughter, and grandchild on both my mother and father's side. And so really being the oldest, I feel like advocacy was really taught to me young, like really making sure that it's you're really helping it be a safe space, you're interrupting violence, you're interrupting teasing, you're taking care of everybody in sight. And I feel like that's who my grandmas and my grandpas are for their families as well, and even just for our communities, and my uncles and my moms as employees, and how much they try to give back to their communities, um, especially the youth, whether that's coaching or working as a counselor in the school, but always trying to volunteer or get some capacity, whether that's like a ride to sweat or a ride to go vote or a ride to ceremony. So really just like learning that and being around that. And I remember going to college, and I was majored in criminal justice, and I wanted to do human trafficking in the form of border patrol, and kind of help with the bus and with the help with the youth in that way. But then I really learned and then studying in undergrad, seeing like not a lot of representation for Indigenous, whether that was our ratings in criminal justice. I did a lot of research and I did a lot of research about sexual assault, trafficking, sexual violence, domestic violence, and linked to the boarding schools and linked to the histories, Indigenous histories, and seeing a lot of that lacking. And so I really wanted to kind of aim my work experience towards that of representation of Indigenous people, making sure our stories were heard, making sure that our resources and that we were being taken care of in that way. And like important pieces of our history. And so really trying to help expand education and resources for violence on the reservation and off the reservation. I'm really lucky for my life experience growing up on and off the reservation. I bounced back from Rocky Boy, Montana to Missoula, Montana. Born in Havre, grew up in Rocky Boy, then went to Missoula so my mom could go to graduate school. And then then she moved back to give back to the community. And when I graduated, I was like, see you, mom, I'm moving back to Missoula. And then, and that's where I learned a lot of my advocacy experience and learning advocacy in local young mothers at risk shelters. In Missoula, Montana, it's a hub for a lot of resources and a lot of Indigenous families, a lot of Indigenous survivors travel from surrounding reservations, or it's a hub for training and education as well. So being able to be a part of that and just wanting to expand those resources and that education, I've also have work experience not only as a sexual assault advocate and domestic violence advocate and sex trafficking, but also in the child welfare system, working with families, and a lot of our histories aren't learned. A lot of our stories from our survivors aren't told. And, a lot of really just making sure that the survivors, our Indigenous sisters are met with, or our Indigenous brothers and relatives, really making sure that they're met with the same respect and kindness, not just for our Indigenous relatives, but for everyone. We joined this movement to interrupt violence and to really expand on that education and, misconceptions, right, of our movement and of what sexual violence is. And just being a part of MIWSAC, it's like, I remember that term being our baby advocate days, right? Like, like I would go to MIWSAC's website and I would go to CSVN-AW just to help with that, like to bring more like representation and education of Indigenous communities to the organizations I was working at, because being the only Indigenous advocate, but we would serve a huge Indigenous population. And so really just wanting to expand on that access and education and like that understanding of really why the distrust is there, but like really building a connection, right? And building that understanding is really kind of what built me, and why I really want to think of like being here at MIWSAC. When I was an advocate, I'd really study the resources of MIWSAC and the trainings available even before being an employee. So to now be a part of it, it's awesome.
Shayla, thank you so much for sharing that. I love the way you spoke about kind of both cultural, but also like familial practices of interrupting violence. And I think there is something to be said for families who maybe don't like succumb identity to violence, but continue to grapple with it and continue to talk about how are we going to interrupt this, and maybe not even talk about it, but just model ways of interrupting that. That violence isn't always something outside of our communities. Violence is often within our communities, and we have to understand how we got to today before we can begin to unravel that. I very strongly believe that. Um, Thank you very much for sharing your heart, and I'm just so glad you're at MIWSAC. Steph, would you like to share?
Sure. Thank you, Shayla. Shayla and I just got off a conversation about a training that we wanted to do together, and I feel like everything you guys have said, I can completely relate with on a lot of levels. I have had the amazing opportunity, and I still have the honor of working with some really great people Um, not only in this field, not only for my tribe, not only for me, but just like all the programs we work with. I just, I honestly, I just feel so blessed because I have never had a day working with MUSAC, or in like with this work where I felt that there wasn't a purpose. And for me, I think that's where my calling to this work comes from is I am a survivor myself, like many of us, and um, I remember going to school at United Tribes Technical College, and I was going to school for first nursing, then I switched to nutrition and wellness, but I've always, you can even see back then that, like we had a grant writing class and I was doing like this healing, like transitional living, home living, it was always there. It was always part of me. Um, and even if I tried to go do something completely different, I felt pulled to this because this is where my heart is. I feel like all of the things that I experienced as a child, experienced as a teenager, and as a young woman, all of those things were a part of my story that I can now kind of help others with, and it feels really good to be able to work with programs and be able to relate with them. I think that's an important part of tribal coalitions and the TTA world is like we know what it feels like. We know the obstacles, and our heart is there. I can't begin to even name like everybody because I just have had even since I was young, my aunties. I'm glad that you said that, Shayla. Like your family, because that's a big part of where I learned. I proudly come from a long line of strong Lakota women that would teach me things throughout life, not only resilience, but love and compassion and empathy and tradition. And, all of those things growing up, I try to use those and remember that about myself when I'm working with programs now. I think, right now I remember going to class, and I want to do a shout out to Dr. Wanda Agnew. She was a big part of just the teachings that she brought at United Tribes and how she had these open conversations. And that's where I started learning my voice, and learning. And also, I interned also in college, Becki, at a DV shelter and hotline. And that's kind of where I'm like, hey, like I'm actually working in it, and learning. And I really it felt right. There was a connection that was made, and I just continued to work in roles and in my community after college, um, that were trying to promote that healing and change. And so it is it when people say it's heart work, I really believe that's what it is. I want to make shout out to after that Carmen O'Leary. She taught me a lot. I got to work with her with the Native Women's Society of the Great Plains, Amanda Takeswear Bonnet, Sandy Frazier, Medina Matonis, all these people, all these women, Hallie Bonger White, like all of them continue to still back me and still be there for everybody and like trying to make that change. And I don't know. I think to continue to support that we provide for each other. Um, yeah, it is. It really is. And, like that continued fight. And it is a fight, right? It's like that fight for safety and healing and change, all of that. I think I'm really glad you did this, Ingrid, because advocates, um, I feel like each one of us, each one of them bring something different and unique, and they hold their purpose is a little different for everybody, but they all bring that unique experience and their unique heart and way of connecting with relatives, but the goal, is supporting survivors in their journey. And for me, it has been part of my healing journey and continues to be part of my healing journey. So I'm just very thankful for all of the women and people and that that are advocates and continue to like support our communities.
Oh, thank you so much, Steph. I was taking notes as you were talking because I feel like there's so much more that I have to learn from you. Um, I think, as advocates, in any role when you're providing direct service, we're taught to be very boundaried. And, that's for our own safety. It's also, because it's part of the model, right? That we really, we adopt the person that we're here to support, their priorities, right? Like we're not asserting our own priorities or our own vision. We're there to advocate for what matters to them and what's meaningful to them. And I remember when something kind of like shifted for me where that became easy. Like it became very easy to be quiet in my own thoughts or to be quiet in my own vision of, how a case could progress. And I was glad for that because otherwise, there's just a lot of tension sometimes, right? When you're like, your heart is breaking and, you're carrying the story or you're carrying the grief. And I will also say that sometimes the invisibility of the advocate is also a trauma response. I think, the way that we become very neutral, we have a flat affect, not only because of our training, but also because the work is hard. And so then to also recover from that and to say, like, I'm still a whole person. I still have a whole heart. I still have a whole mind, a whole spirit for the work, for the movement, informed by these stories that I've carried. Um, and also, I'm not invisible as an advocate. Like my experiences are part of the movement too. Like this, sometimes we talk about like uh, secondary trauma or vicarious trauma or those types of things. But more so than that, I think the identity of the advocate sometimes just gets a little bit lost. Sometimes maybe because our whole identity in our community becomes that, oh, they're the person to call if you need help with, whatever. I remember telling you guys I've been at MIWSAC for very close to 2 years now, and I still regularly get calls for help with things that I did in my last, direct service job. And folks will say like, oh, I've been on night shift. I didn't know that you didn't do that anymore. And it's like, you've been on night shift for 2 years, like, but yes, absolutely. On line 3A, this is what we're going to do. Like we still have that because that's our identity. And sometimes that's just our role in our community. And there's value in that. But something else you mentioned, Steph, I think is, really the point of our conversation today. And that to me is that we are resilient, both as advocates and as Native women. And we are, resilient because of the way that we've been created and the way that we've been raised in the movement. And that does not preclude us from experiencing deep joy. And that can't inhibit us from being able to also, celebrate a win or to celebrate, a moment of peace or safety or clarity for ourselves or for the folks that we serve. And I do think that while we hold our joy close and we do value it immensely, I also, want to work to kind of center that more so than the factors outside of us, right? The fact that violence continues and it sometimes does feel like an insurmountable battle. One of the one of the folks I worked with in my last direct service job before joining MIWSAC um, reminded me on a particularly challenging day when we were we were just kind of in the depths of it, when you're in one of those cases where it's intense and everything is time sensitive and it feels like you're never really getting ahead. And she just reminded me, like, that everybody is doing this for a reason. Like everybody who's involved in this case is doing it for a reason. And it gave me pause to consider, like, oh, right, I have my own reasons. I thought it was just me, on my own journey. I forgot that everybody else who's involved in this also has their own purpose, has their own healing, has their own spiritual calling, that this is a part of. And so I see that in each of you. I see that, for our wonderful interpreters, for folks that we meet through the coalition, and I'm just really grateful for that. So all three of you mentioned, the folks, either by name or just referring to them, who helped kind of raise you in the movement. And I think this is an interesting, maybe a unique dynamic, to doing this work in, either on reservations or in tribal communities, or for our relatives wherever they may be living. And that is the role of kind of like a public figure in the movement. Um, and I've kind of wondered if that's a little bit more unique to, the movement to end sexual violence against Native people in an Indian country, because the movement is, I think, pretty revolutionary. It's pretty radical just by its existence. But I'm wondering, in your experience, and please, anybody, feel free to answer this. What role have you seen, community leaders or elders or those public figures, folks who are, maybe quick to speak up, or who are available to, um, to respond or to activate a community response? How, what role do they play in addressing sexual violence, either in your community or in your experience? And do you feel like that is different, for the movement as it relates to Native folks, or, to our relatives, or kind of what are your thoughts on that?
I'd like to talk about like our women's societies and the programs that are like right when you were saying that one thing, and it's not specific to sexual assault and the response, but what it is, I think it's a little bit more of healing prevention, kind of in that realm. But um, I think of the 100 Horsewomen Society that me and my daughters are involved in, and that's why I kind of brought out Sandy Fraser and I mean Sandy Fraser and Medina, because they're really leading and bringing this 100 Horse Society. What they do is they um, they bring in an old ceremony that was almost lost, and that's our coming of age ceremony. And I speak to that right now because I think it's so important, and especially as a survivor myself, like what those teachings, do for our young women. They give us, they're connecting us to how we used to think about our connection to the land and our bodies, and the teachings as a woman, and all of those things that were lost during boarding school, and assimilation and colonization, like all of that. So I'd have to say that those teachings are so important, and they've made I and there's women that are going through that coming of age ceremony that are elderly, and that didn't get a chance to do that. And I'm speaking to that because it is life changing. And I got to experience it with my daughter. And I see what it's doing for other families and young women. And um, I feel like what I experienced there, it's, a 3 to 4 day ceremony ran by women. And what you're doing is like providing teachings and learning, and celebrating that you're becoming a woman. And there was a part in there where what you do is you wash your daughter's hair. And I looked down the line with other mothers and caretakers, and I've seen, an elder woman going through this process because she didn't get a chance to. And I was with my daughter emotional, right? Because like this is like kind of mimicking like the last time I'm going to be able to braid my daughter's hair. And I looked down and I seen like what that was doing and the emotions that this was bringing out and the whole experience, I mean, I'm just getting like chills thinking about it right now because it was such a beautiful moment. Anybody that is raising those and teaching those or and and teaching those even those life skills and like what all of that safety, everything was touched on during those days, those 4 days. And so I have to speak on that because I think that is directly like the connection to healing and getting help for other survivors and and things like all of those. It's like I mean, there's many ways, but I think there's something very core and important about that. And so I wanted to speak that out and talk about a little bit about those methods or those healing opportunities. And like I just right away thought about 100 Horsewomen Society.
I mean, Steph, the way that you talk about your experience there being part of your healing, and I think about what you offer, what you're offering to your daughter in modeling that, like accessing not just the prescription from like mainstream research-based best practices, for healing intergenerational trauma, et cetera, that we are fed and is valuable, but also what is best for your family and what is rooted in your tradition and values. I feel like that's a privilege and a responsibility that we probably need to talk a lot more about. Do you know what I mean? Like culture is not our culture, our values are not separate from sexual violence. Like these things are interconnected, and the way that we're living really declares our values. So if we're asserting the sovereignty of the body, if we're teaching the interconnectedness of the human with all creation, with the land, um, like there is profound healing in that. And thank you also for speaking to the need to support our elders. I think, we were just talking earlier today about how often the conversations around prevention focus on the youth, right? Like preventing sexual violence, we got to get to the youth, got to get in the schools. And yes, that is important. And there is a role there. And also, our elders, our ancestors experienced so much violence and so much trauma, and we are still carrying that. And I think what we can offer to others, the way that we can support others' healing, um, supports our own as well. And certainly as we look to the future, that just gives me a lot of hope. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think also, when you're talking, kind of about my initial question about, what role do community leaders and our elders and folks who are willing to be, publicly recognized and associated with this movement. I love the connection there to folks who are revitalizing or, renewing connections to our traditional practices, because that is absolutely part of a holistic response to sexual violence. And also, like you mentioned earlier, Steph, reconnecting to our joy. Like we get to be joyful and resilient, and we get to look to the future while understanding that the past holds a lot of trauma and grief as well. And it often does take folks who are willing to say, I'm willing to be identified or to stand up and to advocate for these practices or for these programs or for educating folks in this way. I'm willing to stand up and speak to it and be the squeaky wheel, right? Um, and really be a community leader in that fashion. Becki or Shayla, do you have any thoughts about that?
I really appreciate how you highlighted that healing full circle, of a lot. We do have a lot geared towards the youth and really acknowledging our history, and taking care of our elders the way they take care of us and respecting that and, really taking it upon ourselves and I don't want to say accountability, but our responsibility of healing and giving a chance to our elders as well who haven't gotten and I'm sorry, and also like with our community leaders, you know, just reminding them and informing them of all the of the full I'm gonna try sorry, I'm struggling with the word I want to put with the power that they do have, or that the power that they can carry with sexual violence on the reservation. And I mean like resources, education, of whether that means building that ourselves or giving our reservation a chance, whether that's pulling out resources from outside of the reservation. But you know, really understanding and connecting with their leadership and their duties and what's available to them, not only by like from MIWSAC and us as advocates of us serving in what we see day to day, but really kind of like kindly reminding them, you know, like there are conferences that you can go to for education. There are spaces like this one that we're in, just like for any chance to learn and connect, right? Just to learn from the community that you are serving, but also just to remind them of the policies and you know, getting back to our roots and our healing and trying, you know, we talk about time, right? Like we don't have time to do this, but really like slowing it down and thinking of leadership and in community, like having the power to actually do that. Like how can we really like I'm thinking of like indigenous values, you know, instead of trying to find the time for ceremony, but like really how do we connect that with like the the way our lives have evolved, but then the factors of working with that, but then also getting to our healing and cultural. I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm explaining it. I think I am, yes.
No, I think you're doing a wonderful job. At least I'm learning a lot from you. And I think like even just asserting or, maybe declaring what we value by the way that we spend our time is such an important practice and kind of an evaluation tool as well, right? Like instead of, ceremony or, centering our values as an afterthought, that it really is a responsibility to bring those in, to integrate them into the way that we're not only providing services, but I think also the way that we're tending to each other. Like kind of what I mentioned earlier, advocates often are forgotten and are so under-resourced, especially in Indian country. And it is something that even, our non-native colleagues and partners are observing. And, even last week, I know I mentioned to some of you, I had a meeting and this was, government agency, and they're saying, we were thinking about, who would benefit the most from this program and who is least likely to access this service. And we thought of our tribal partners. Like we know this, right? Like we know that, um, even taking care of ourselves and taking care of advocates and even taking our time off, as a few of us have been talking about lately, is such a challenge. And I think those are some of the I think that's a trauma response in some ways. Feeling like no one can do the work if I'm not here. Maybe we've even been told that, or like, discouraged from taking our time off or from having boundaries. But I do feel like any of the ways that we can integrate our values into providing very high quality services for folks who have experienced sexual violence is a worthwhile investment. Becki, any thoughts?
I have lots of thoughts, but towards the end of when you were speaking there and talking about um, boundaries, it just made me think of like, yes, our response to all of the things that we're taking in and helping other folks process, but just like also how this work and who we are as people can be so like just deeply linked and just like it just is who a lot of us are, right? A lot of folks on this call and a lot of folks who do this work. And so I think about, like how do you have those boundaries and how do you separate, work from life when they are the same, right? I mean, it's maybe a different person situation that you might be dealing with in this day, right? In your role as an advocate, if you have this formal role. But when this work and working in community and caring for community is who we are as people, I think sometimes it's difficult because it's a part of you. And so it does feel like, yes, there can be someone else, but I care and I want to be there, right? I want to be there for this person, and I want to be a part of this, and I want to contribute, and all of those things that come along with it. And so I think um, there are many professions maybe that feel similarly. I don't know, because this has been, where I've been blessed to be able to work in my entire career, right? Outside of serving people and being a server, literally, but that is very like closely related to this kind of work, right? And so it just makes me think about just all like the linkages and our identities and all of these things, and how I think you can just feel it when you connect with advocates, right? That this is not necessarily a lifelong career for everyone, right? Um, but I don't think it has to be a career. I think it can be just your way of life and who you are as a person. And if you are able to find a good balance and a good mix where you can, um, be compensated to do the work, that's awesome, right? But there are many, many people who are just doing this work day in and day out because that's who they are and that's where they want to spend their time, or they've been called to spend their time. And so, um, I don't know, I just think about how beautiful that is, and to just be able to, just um, truly be of service to community and to survivors while you may be doing your own healing, and like that it's okay, that you are accepted, that there is a place for you in this movement, right, in this work, and that we are all constantly just evolving and learning and welcoming new people and celebrating accomplishments and just supporting each other. And especially, in the last few years, months, days, whatever, I think things are difficult for a lot of people, and it's not just about sexual violence, right? But I think it is unfortunately something that a lot of us have shared experiences around, and so it has created, at least for me and many people that I know, a sense of community and support that I am just really truly grateful for. And so, like I said, when I was thinking about like sometimes I don't want to have good boundaries, whatever that means, because I truly love what I get to do and the people that I get to do it with, and seeing people transform their lives and heal and do really awesome things. So, yeah, I guess that's what's on my mind about that.
Well, Becki, while you were describing, kind of the joy and the celebration of being able to be in community with other advocates, either by title, by profession, or, because you can definitely feel another's heart. I was also thinking about sometimes it feels like spiritual direction or protection. I'm sure you are all like, yeah, absolutely it is. When you are in communication or contact with somebody and you just can feel like we are not speaking the same language. And I think that direction is also helpful. I had this experience at the Conference on Crimes Against Women last year. One thing about me that you guys, I think most of you on the call know, I always have my huge notebook with me, and I'm just writing like crazy notes about all kinds of things and ideas because I'm always so inspired by people. So I'm sitting at this conference and I'm trying to get ready for my presentation, but I'm also like can't leave these other sessions because everyone else is so inspiring and encouraging and innovative. And I remembered that a few folks in my life were, working on addressing some issues or some concerns around sexual violence, and they were very ill-equipped to do so. And of course, I'm like, put me in. I'm over here, right? Like I have some ideas, I have some resources, and I I just texted like, "Hey, I just sat through this presentation. Can I send you the link to this person's TED Talk?" And the response was, um, "I know I don't think that I need to learn anything else right now." And it took me a little while to process that, and by a little while, I mean like a long time, like 6 months. And um, we as advocates can certainly hang on to things. But really what I realized my reaction was more so to that resistance that you don't often hear from advocates to learning something new or to receiving a new model or a different paradigm or new information. And I think that like mental flexibility of advocates is just remarkable and it's beautiful, and I believe that it's very deeply spiritual. And what I was also thinking about, Becki, was that feeling of understanding that we're in connection and relationship with folks who are survivors, but who are also very dedicated to contending for their own healing. And I know we've all had this experience of being in space or being connected with people who are like almost determined to not do their work, like they're so they're so unhealthy or they're so dysregulated that you just know, right? Like this conversation is going to get negative really fast, or we're not going to get to any good stuff. I'm going to have a hard time learning here. And so what I just wanted to celebrate as we reach the end of our hour together today is the dedication that I have seen from each of the three of you to your own healing, and how I've seen that extend toward the healing of others in our circle, both at MIWSAC and the folks that we interact with on our state and our national projects. And healing in and of itself is a full-time job. And so I appreciate the space that you've all dedicated to that, what you've allowed me to witness and to observe of that. And I also just appreciate like your dedication to showing up as a healthy person in space. And we know that sometimes that vicarious trauma, unfortunately, leads us to hurt other people. And so, what I'm hoping we can leave with folks today in this moment of celebration is a highlighting of the beauty of healing, and even in the messy process, that we can celebrate access to healing. We can celebrate access to ceremony. We can celebrate access to resources. Shayla, like you were talking about, getting on the MIWSAC website or the website of our other amazing tribal coalition sister organizations, and like just continuing to work for it. I don't think that you know the tough stuff that we go through ever really goes away, but I do believe it evolves, and it can inspire us and it can fuel us. And I've seen that modeled in each of you. So as we wrap up our time together, I just want to offer one more opportunity. Is there anything that small, big, uh, uh, little quirky observation, or a more macro observation that you would like to celebrate, just to state it here, to name it, to uplift it, and we certainly welcome folks who are joining us today to drop any celebrations that you would like to share in the chat as well.
Everyone's so quiet. I'm just again, I'm just thrilled that we're having this conversation. I hope we get to have many more. And I I know we talked last week about sexual assault awareness and awareness months. And I think one of the things that is truly great about them is that we do get a chance to celebrate and specifically celebrate those people. And so this has made me think about the folks that I want to make it a point to just reach out to and thank them and just, check in on them because we don't always get that. So that's what I'm going to do in my celebration is just check in on some of my fellow advocates and just say hello and make sure that they are well.
I just want to thank you, Ingrid, for, kind of like setting this space for us. And it's a really good reminder of like why we're here. And so I really appreciate that. Your questions had me kind of like thinking like, what am I doing this for? And like, where did this come from? And, all those little pieces. And I think that's a really important part about this work is remembering that and remembering why we're here and just, remembering like our teachers and remembering that we are here like still in support of everybody. So thank you for those questions and inviting me on.
Yes, thank you, Ingrid, for bringing us all together and for everyone for listening to us. These conversations aren't easy and the work that we do isn't easy. So it's just great to be in and show up and support one another. And I really hope that not just April, but like that we're always taking care of ourselves because the work that we do is not easy. And I hope that we don't ever feel alone. So.
Absolutely, Shayla. And thank you, Steph and Becki, for what you shared as well. We are just about at the top of our hour, so I just want to highlight a few other upcoming events. We have a few more webinars this month. We are not going to have a webinar on Tuesday, April 22nd, because that will be MIWSAC's annual conference. And as a reminder, that conference registration information is on MIWSAC's website and our social media. And we also have a self-care carnival and Wachipi as part of the conference. And we warmly welcome and invite all to attend. We also are co-hosting a kind of an after hours SAM celebration event, kind of a toast to the movement. That will be this Thursday, April 10th. And that information is also on our social media. And if you have questions about that, you can feel free to reach out to me. Or is there the confirmation email you would have gotten to register for this webinar can also get you in touch with me. To register for that, we're going to have like a sound bath. We're going to have some performances. We're going to have some reflections on the movement. We're co-hosting that with Mujeres Latinas de Acción, Me Too International, the National Alliance to End Sexual Violence, and a few other partners. So we invite you to continue the celebration there as well. Thank you all so much for joining.